Okay, so in order to keep on time, I'll get started. And as I say, I just want to really welcome you all to this session, really on behalf of the IIIF4Research Network and the Library of College Dublin. My name is Arlene Healy, and I'm responsible for digital systems and services in the Library of Trinity College Dublin. And I'm co-principal investigator on the network, along with my colleagues Lorna Hughes of the University of Glasgow and Mary Ann Constantine of the University of Wales, who I know are attending today's event. Now, just the usual kind of housekeeping notes, this seminar will be recorded. We're really keen for the recording then to be made available on the network, the IIIF4Research Network website in a number of days after the event. We'll be putting that up on Twitter and so on as soon as it's kind of released to let you know when it's available. So speaking of Twitter, it'd be great if you could tweet along with today's event. We had a holding slide up there a minute ago, but just to remind you all that you could just tweet, obviously using the hashtag IIIF, the hashtag Virtual Trinity Library. And remember as well that we've got a Twitter account for the network, and that's at IIIF4Research. I'll put that into the chat in a little while. Speaking of chat functions and Q&A functions, what we'd like to do today is for you to post any questions that you'd have for the speakers at any time during the event. But if you could do that using the Q&A function, that'd be great. And that's on the bottom navigation bar. So we'll address the questions then during the Q&A session in the second hour. And my colleague Laura Shanahan, who's head of research collections here in the library, she'll moderate the Q&A. So she'll take the questions that are posted and ask them of the speakers, and we'll get some answers that way. But please feel free to use the chat for general comments that you might want to share, including just to welcome yourselves and introduce yourselves, I should say, as you're coming in, and letting us know where you're from. And just make sure that everyone is selected when you're putting that in the chat. So just to go on to explain that this seminar is one of a series provided by members of the research network. And the network is by partners at Trinity College Dublin, the University of Glasgow, the University of Durham, and the University of Wales. And the aim of the network is to investigate the potential for innovative forms of scholarly discussion and interchange that's offered by IIIF, or the International Image Interoperability Framework. So the goal of the seminar series is to bring together academic researchers from a range of humanities disciplines, along with technical developers, librarians, archivists, and other heritage professionals to jointly explore issues involved in the adoption and development of IIIF, and to identify areas where IIIF can have the greatest transformative effect in arts and humanities scholarship. So today's seminar, it's going to be informal, it's going to be multifaceted, and we're going to have a series of wonderful case studies from 4 speakers. And then in the second hour, we'll have a chance for some informal networking and Q&A. So just also, I wanted to highlight the fact that for Trinity Library, the network goals are really fully aligned with everything that we're doing, particularly around our current philanthropic campaign in relation to the Virtual Trinity Library. And this is a program that we've got going at the moment to advance research and disseminate knowledge on the unique collections of the library through cataloguing, curating, conserving, and digitizing these rich and rare collections. So we've been delighted to be able to incorporate innovative technologies such as IIIF to make these collections more accessible and to facilitate research. So many of you are aware that IIIF is one of the most exciting and widely adopted recent developments in the digital humanities. It's been adopted by a wide range of heritage institutions, maybe too many to name, but just to kind of flag institutions like the Vatican Library, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the British Library, the Digital Repository of Ireland, and the National Libraries of Wales and Scotland. So with that, I suppose I'm very happy now to hand over to our first speaker in today's session. And that is Professor Mark Faulkner. So Mark is an Usher Assistant Professor in Medieval Literature in Trinity College Dublin. And he's Director of Phil and Medieval Studies and an expert in the 12th century. He's published widely on medieval manuscripts, including the entry on them in Oxford Bibliographies Online, and a case study on their use as primary sources for Adam Matthews. He's also behind numerous public engagement events with manuscripts, including the Beyond the Book of Kells lecture series. So I'll hand over to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlene. And I will just share my screen with everyone. You can now see. My title is IIIF and Challenges in Teaching, Researching and Engaging the Public with Medieval Manuscripts. And I feel like I should begin with at least 3 caveats and maybe more. The first caveat is that I have almost no hands-on experience with IIIF. I had to ask Arlene to give me a brief taster and tour of what might be possible with it prior to speaking to you. The second is that I'm a medievalist, so most of my work is confined to medieval manuscripts rather than any of the many other kinds of objects that can be presented using IIIF. And the third one is that my background is in literary studies, so I'm primarily interested in texts, and therefore my work on manuscripts is at the interface of object and text, and that will, I think, colour some of what I'm going to say today. So hopefully those caveats don't disqualify me from speaking first at an event on IIIF, but we shall see. I'm going to talk in turn about the 3 topics of my title, research, teaching, and public engagement. So first, research. And here I think I need to talk most about what I see as my literary bias in approaching manuscripts. And one way to frame that question is what is this text? This is an image of a manuscript from the British Library and Cotton Faustina A9. And this is actually a question I ask our 3rd years in a course on the book. And I just ask them, well, what is this text? Not because I'm particularly interested in the answer, but more in the philosophical elements that underlie identifying a text as a text. One answer, or the simple answer, is that it's Ælfric of Eynshama's homily for the first Sunday after Easter, which is one of his first series of Catholic homilies. But some other answers might be that it's Eftir thas Heilandas Erist, whereon his discipuli belocana. Those are the first words of the text, also known as the incipit, which is a way that texts have long been identified in manuscript catalogues. Another might be that it's CH 116. Another might be that it's his Dominica 1 post Pascha, first Sunday after Easter. Another is that it's B1.1.18, which is its number in the fundamental list of surviving Old English texts. So the issue I'm trying to flag here is that it's difficult to decide on standards by which to identify texts in a way that renders descriptions of them maximally interoperable. And further beyond that, there's an issue of, even if you can describe a text in a stable way, what are you actually referring to when you describe that text? Here are 2 possible things you could be referring to when you say something is Ælfric's homily for the first Sunday after Easter. The one on the left is an edition from 1844, the Editio Princeps, the first time it had been edited, and the other one is the current edition from 1997. And even if we can agree that you're probably referring to the most recent edition, then are you referring to that edition or to the manuscripts that underpin it? So that edition is based on a different British Library manuscript to the one I initially showed you. And when we refer to the text in Cotton Faustina A9, what relation does that bear to Royal 7c12? We can try and schematize this a bit like this, and I will come on to the implications of all this for IIIF in a second. So this tries to diagram in one possible way the relationship between works, literary works, which are primarily what I study, I suppose, in a School of English, and manuscript texts, which are primarily what libraries hold and seek to describe in IIIF. And beneath that, we also have readerly texts, which is another thing still, and gestures toward the fact that manuscripts were annotated over time, and so that what a manuscript looked like at the moment of its production is not quite what it looked like 50 years later, and is not quite what it looked like at several points during its history thereafter. But when libraries digitize, what they're primarily digitizing is manuscript texts. And in particular, it's these 10 other manuscript texts. It's the ones that haven't been edited in those editions I showed you. And that's what makes it digitization and the affordances of IIIF exciting, because it has the potential to massively increase the data that we as scholars can reason over. That kind of data exists for some texts and manuscripts already. It exists for the homily I showed you at the beginning, thanks to a DH project called Digital Elfrich, which edits all the surviving manuscripts of this particular sermon. But the number of texts for which that kind of detail exists is extremely small, and the production costs are sky high. And one thing that IIIF does is open the possibility of editions like this for every surviving medieval text. And that is exciting. So some of the affordances of IIIF for research, as I see them, are an increasingly comprehensive identification of the surviving manuscript witnesses to a given text. So if we can get the matter of textual identification sorted out and how we label texts, then we should be able to generate ever more comprehensive lists of how many manuscripts of particular works survive. It offers the possibility for ready visualization of a text circulation history using the manifest metadata about place of origin, date, and so on. So you could very easily visualize a text circulation across medieval Europe once sufficient libraries have encoded their metadata in that way. And through the facility it offers to include transcriptions as part of manifests, it facilitates textual critical work on the text, something like the digital Elfrich I just showed you. It would be facilitated very closely by that. And then also distant reading or cultural analytic approaches to the Middle Ages, such as Google Books opened up when it emerged in the early part of the 2010s. But with affordances come challenges and implications. There need to be clear standards for how we name texts so that the same text, which is a non-trivial notion, can be linked between different manuscripts. There's a tension between comprehensiveness and reliability in generating metadata, for instance, around date or place of origin. And there's therefore an imperative to be transparent about the information value of what goes into metadata. This point has been made in literature on paleography periodically over many decades, but there's a situation where you have standard reference works and everyone cites those standard reference works for the dates of particular manuscripts without necessarily saying that they're doing so. And there have been arguments that it's important to acknowledge that this is where this date comes from. And so in a manifest, we really want to know if the date is a kind of new independent claim about the date of a particular manuscript or has just been repeated from a secondary source. And a third question is what kind of imprimatur attaches to third-party material that gets incorporated into manifests? For example, if you want to generate crowdsourced transcription, which certainly I'm very keen on, what responsibility attaches to the people maintaining that metadata to indicate where it has come from and whether it has in any way been reviewed for reliability and accuracy. So those are my thoughts on IIIF and research. I'll now come to teaching. I teach on the MPhil in Medieval Studies. I coordinate the two manuscript-focused courses on that. And I'm constantly struck at how learning about manuscripts has changed radically in the 15 years since I did it. I learned from things like that dreadful photocopy in one of my binders, because even in the 2000s, photographs of manuscripts were not readily available, and had usually been subjected to being photocopied about 12 times before they got to you, which made them even less easy to read and even more challenging to learn how to transcribe them. Now, one can access hundreds of manuscripts at the click of a button. And this obviously opens up a great deal of potential for teaching and teaching innovation. IIIF viewers like Mirador facilitate the comparison of different pages of the same manuscript at the same time, or comparison between manuscripts attributed to the same scribes, so that instead of relying on some scholar telling you that there are two scribes in this manuscript, you can actually track that in real time and come to your own opinion, or you can look at a scribe working across multiple manuscripts very easily. It should be possible, moreover, for teachers to assemble exemplary collections of manuscripts illustrating the progression of particular scripts over time. For instance, Proto-Gothic, and selecting examples from libraries across the world that best illustrate the development of Proto-Gothic. There's potential, moreover, for teachers and indeed their students to annotate images paleographically and highlight the most significant features that you want students to look for in them. There's also the facility for setting up collaborative transcription tasks, where students can learn transcription conventions, learn how to deploy appropriate transcription conventions, or familiarize themselves with a particular script while transcribing a manuscript, and by the by, generating a transcript of that text or that portion of the manuscript that could be used as part of the manifest, and making that text available digitally as well as the manuscript. All in all, IIIF has the potential to enable students to learn over a much wider, higher quality and more apposite body of material than ever before. Again, though, this brings with it responsibilities that need to be considered. Ideally, we would maximize findability, which is obviously a feature of metadata quality. I've tried a little bit in the past to try and find suitable examples for teaching by searching metadata for script, and it's really not very easy as it stands. So I think if we can encode script type better and more findably, that would be excellent. There's a challenge of developing architecture for sharing teaching resources, so that if someone assembles a really good collection of material to teach Proto-Gothic, a way to share that out so that colleagues in other universities can use it. There's the challenge of developing architecture for challenges, where students across multiple universities might want to collaborate to swiftly transcribe a particular manuscript. And that might fit quite well into European-wide initiatives about things like Erasmus mobilities that actually don't involve long-term mobility, but involve a lot of work digitally. And there's the challenge to develop standards for publication of the outputs for such challenges as part of manifest. So that speaks back to something I said about research, that does there need to be some kind of peer review process for ingesting metadata that's generated by third parties and incorporated by libraries? So that's teaching. And finally, public engagement. So this is the Old English Illustrated Hexateuch in the British Libraries. It's digital realization. It's an 11th century manuscript lavishly illustrated. And if I often think about what a member of the public makes on landing on this, I use this and like manuscripts from the British Library weekly in my research, but what does a member of the public think when landing on this digital object? If they come and see the Book of Kells in Trinity, they get a whole interpretive exhibition to explain to them the significance and meaning of the Book of Kells. If they land on this web page, they have a small bit, 6 or 7 lines of quite dense text at the top, and that's really it. And this is somewhere that IIIF undoubtedly has a role in terms of storytelling, the storytelling software that's starting to be developed for use with it, and the facility for Manifest maybe to outlink to other pre-existing digital objects that facilitate engagement. So one of the artifacts from the Beyond the Book of Kells lecture series I organized is a series of podcasts that record the lectures that individual people gave about Trinity manuscripts. So there's one for the Book of Almar on the slide, and feasibly that could be linked to from the manifest, and then people encountering the Book of Almar have a 50-minute introduction to what it's all about and what its significance is. The other thing I have wondered about and have a project in as a funding bit at the moment is linking to public domain translations of texts and manuscripts. So there's a large number of translations of medieval works that are available out of copyright as part of archive.org, for instance, and they provide a convenient and sort of rough and ready bridge to a slightly deeper public engagement with digital manuscripts, I think. As with everything, though, there are implications for thinking this way. One of which is if we are going to link to out of copyright digital translations, then there's a sustainability issue. What happens if those objects disappear? And we clearly need protocol and architecture for outlinking to those digital objects. I think there's also very considerable scope for consulting with heritage professionals on the best ways to storify manuscripts. We're quite inexperienced, I think, in this field compared to people who work, say, with buildings or other heritage sites about the best ways to tell the stories of the objects that we preserve or study. So, to bring all of this together with a few final thoughts, prior to digitization, a scholar had, or indeed a member of the public, if they wanted to see a manuscript, had to go and see it in person. That required long planning and sometimes delayed particular research projects for months at a time. Digitization also facilitates greater accuracy than ever before in research. That before, where you might just let an editorial reading slide because it wasn't really economically viable to go and check it, nowadays you can just call up the manuscript at the touch of a button. So there are so many new possibilities raised by digitization in IIIF. And I hope I've given you a flavor of some of the ones that occur to me, but also some of the quite onerous and perhaps difficult work on infrastructure and renewing scholarship and teaching for a digital age that will be entailed with that. Thanks for listening.